So the digital dairy chain is a 5-year project. We're into year 4, and it's a Strengthen Places funded project from UKRI, looking at collaborative research and development in Dumfries and Galloway, southwest Scotland, and in Cumbria. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? We have 8 overlapping projects, starting right back in school with STEM engagement on the dairy side. And if anybody on the call would like to get in touch with Smart STEMs who are willing to go into schools or help on farm open days to engage with kids to actually try and get the next generation into the dairy workforce. We also have projects looking at the workforce for the future. And the ones that I'm involved with are the innovation brokerage and the collaborative R&D, which is what this is. This is building capacity for research at Barony College in Dumfries and at Strathclyde University. But also, that might be of interest to people on the call, we have 2 maker spaces, one at Ayr College and one at Appleby, where if anybody is thinking about producing new products from dairy, we have maker spaces to help innovate and start people off on that journey. We also have the Milk Ground Technology Accelerator at Strathclyde University. So if somebody has an idea for a product or engineering project, then we have funding available and advice available through the Milk Ground Technology Accelerator. All the details for all of these are on the website. So there are 2 parts to the research. So this is a collaborative R&D project that we're presenting today. We have 12 different projects, and all the details are on our website, so do have a look at those there. We've also got 73 smaller projects. Our last webinar was on one of those innovation vouchers, New Monitor, and we will be having other webinars both on the collaborative R&D and innovation vouchers. So questions at the end. Please put your questions in the chat and we'll have a discussion at the end. So I'd like to introduce Chloe Rodriguez from Galebreaker, who will be starting the seminar. This is a joint project between Galebreaker, High Skeog Farm, SRUC, and the digital dairy chain. So Chloe, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, so just an introduction to the team and who will be speaking today. My name's Chloe Rodriguez. I'm Animal Welfare Specialist at Galebreaker, and I'm covering the whole of the UK at the moment. We then have Andrew Gardner, who's our Technical Director at Galebreaker. We have Professor Carol Ann, who heads up, who's from SRUC, and we also have Ross Vance on the call, who will be here to answer any questions at the end. So just to give a brief introduction to the project and a bit of the timeline. So the project started in 2023 when we won it, and the design of the building took place between October and March 2024. We then built the system, which took place between April and August, and then we had between September 2024 and September 2025, we actually had the calf trial. And this calf trial was a direct comparison to the existing calf hutch system already on the farm. So what did the farm look like prior to 2024? So farms based on the peninsula near Whithorn, which is up in southwest Scotland. And we've got a slightly bigger picture of the UK there for anyone external to the UK as to where the farm's situated. So it's on a peninsula, so it's a very, very exposed site. It's a 200 head dairy herd, all year round calving, high yielding herd, housed all year round. And they are the replacement pre-weaned calves were reared in individual hutches prior to this project taking place. Now, the two main driving factors for Ross on really focusing on the calf system was longevity of the herd. He knew his calves weren't getting the best start possible, which was therefore affecting performance later down the line. And a second reason was family succession. Ross has 3 daughters. He wants to make this appealing for his daughters to take over the farm later on. So what were our design objectives in this project? So it was to build a modular building that can be easily scaled to suit any different size of dairy herd. It was a building which was designed to optimize ventilation at its core. It was a purpose-built to provide an effective system for pre-weaned calf rearing, and the idea to provide a healthy, productive, sustainable, but a profitable calves as well. So I guess my main objective here for me today is to really talk you through how we designed the building and how we optimized that environment to what I believe later got us the results that we did. So when we were designing the system, we were really focused on these 5 key areas: hygiene, moisture, temperature, fresh air, and air speeds. And then to fit into those 5 circles, we got through all these points on, as you can see on the left, and I'll go through all of these in order. So firstly, really thinking about the position and orientation on farm. So actually, initially, Ross wanted to build, because it was easier as the site, he wanted to put the building slightly upper on the farm. But actually, we said, we placed it in a completely greenfield site, we're upwind of older stock. So this building has the freshest air hitting the building. It's perpendicular, so we've got the prevailing wind passing over the ridge. Fresh air can enter through the side curtains, and then we have drive-in access from the front side to clear out. So building around ventilation, what did we include? We have, as you can see, it's a almost polytunnel kind of shape, but we inbuilt a ventilated ridge on this. So it's a clean round-shaped building, which helps promote natural ventilation. And then we also have the prevailing wind, which can have acceleration over the ridge, which helps create a positive negative pressure to help draw hot air out the building. And we've also made sure that any rain that falls within the ridge falls outwards, so there's never any extra moisture being added into the building. We have a positive pressure tube. So this is designed to deliver 8 air exchanges year round. And this is designed, and this photo is here from a smoke test we did. So as you can see, the smoke comes out. We're ventilating the whole of the pen, and then that smoke rises up and is expelled through the ridge. So each pen is constantly getting clean fresh air from this positive pressure system. And this system allows us to close up the building and really focus on temperature throughout the winter months. And I'll speak later on how we open up the building in the summer months. But this tube is delivering 0.3 meters per second right down at calf height. So we're getting air exchanges right down in the calf's microclimate. And then if we flip to how do we then increase air exchanges in the summer months? So we've designed it with an automated curtain on the back. So when the building is warm, the curtain at the back automatically opens up. We have roller screens at the front of the building, which can also be opened up. So this helps in the summer months, gets our 40 air exchanges an hour. The curtain's automatically controlled, so that closes with high winds and rains. And then here you can see we've really tried to draft proof it. So we've got ceiling strips to help reduce drafts coming in and reduce driving rain. You also here in the middle picture, we have a rear walkway. So this is, even when the curtain's up, if you've got strong winds hitting the curtain, any cold air is going to drop into that walkway and not straight into the calf's pen. And then also we have on the rear vent panels at the back, we have this ceiling flap. Again, in the winter months, preventing drafts entering the pen. But equally in the summer months, that can come down to aid ventilation into that calf's microclimate. And then we also have a bird net on the inside of the curtain for when that curtain's open. Pen partitions. So these, we went down a plastic material, so they're a robust plastic paneling. And there's 2 main reasons we went down this route. Firstly, from a hygiene point of view, these clean down really, really well. But secondly, from a temperature point of view, Young calves love to lie against something solid. For years, we've built our buildings in the UK with concrete. Concrete draws heat away from the calf. So when the calf is lying directly against this plastic panelling, we're not drawing any heat away. We have a small concrete upstand at the bottom. So this is to allow for an efficient system and it to be cleaned out properly. And then we also have the panels high enough so there is no calf to calf contact between groups. So really focusing on in this building that one group stays as one group and we're never transmitting along the building through different groups. And then again, we've got these vent panels, again, to help aid ventilation into the calf's microclimate. Drainage, so we've got a 5% fall from the back of the pen all the way to the front of the pen. And then we have at the front of the pen, we have a continuous drain which runs along the front. So this is the idea of keeping that bedding area as dry as possible. We also have grooves in the concrete, which helps when you've got all your bedding compacted on there, it helps trickle moisture out underneath. And then we've got drains which collect fluids from the kitchen and the feeders which are regularly flushed. So really aiming to keep that bedding area clean and dry and reducing moisture sitting there creating ammonia. Calf boxes. So direct from birth, the calf is first housed in these calf boxes and Ross is keeping them in there for about 5 days. The calf is initially housed individually with a central panel which is removed later on. But in the first few hours, housed individually, really focused on getting that colostrum into that calf. In the winter months, as you can see on the first picture, we've got a convective heater. So this is really, if that calf is not being licked properly by the dam, we're really focusing on trying to get that calf dry as quickly as possible. So in the first few hours of life, she's not using her energy to keep warm, but she's using it to go to her immunity. And then we also, in the winter months, we have fabric covers and heat lamps, which can also create a microclimate in these calf boxes. At about 3 days, the middle partition is removed, so that calf is pair housed. And then, as I said, at about 5 days, these calves are then going into the larger group pens. As you can see from the roof on the building, it's made from a translucent roof covering. And this allows about 20% of light through. So it's really creating a naturally light environment, which in the winter months, we saw this additional benefit. So on the right here, we've got a graph, which the dotted line is showing your lux levels. And then your 2 other orange and blue lines are showing your delta pen temperatures. And what you can see here is on a cold winter's day, when it's bright sunshine, is we're getting this additional benefit of solar gain. So we're getting a +4 degrees in the building just via solar gain. And I know what the question then is, okay, what about the summer months when we don't want that solar gain? But actually, because the building is ventilating so well and we're getting enough air exchanges, we never see a buildup of heat in there. We're always similar to the ambient temperature. And then we also have automated lighting. So this is automatically controlled and we have lights controlled before first feeding to wake the calves up and encourage them to feed. Something else we did trial over this period is a preheating the air before it's coming down the positive pressure tube. So the idea of in the UK, if it gets to about below 5 degrees, quite often what we see on farms is we see these tubes being turned off because we want this extra benefit of trying to retain as much heat as we can. So what we came up with is, okay, what happens if we preheat the air coming into the tube? Now, this is always an expensive activity, and we'll come on to speak to this later. Because that tube is delivering 8 air exchanges an hour, you've got to heat that building with those air exchanges. But what we came up with, okay, is what if we have a pulsing activity? So when it dropped below 5 degrees, we had 30 minutes with the tube on, pulsing hot air. And at that air inlet, we were getting +13 degrees compared to ambient. And then we have it off for another 30 minutes. So, okay, we're only getting 50% of the air exchanges, but it's better than it being switched off completely. We'll come on to speak to if this is actually economically viable later on. Another thing which we really focused on was automated pen heaters, so infrared heaters in the calf pens. And how we had it is we had 2 pen heaters in the whole building. So we had that, as you can see from the diagram at the bottom, in group pen 1 and group pen 3. And so the way in which we were filling up the building is we filled up pen 1, pen 3, pen 2, pen 4. So then by the time pen 2 came in, we could switch that heater over to group 2. And those heaters are automatically switched on at about 14 degrees. As you can see, we'll speak about this later, but they were costing about £8.50 a day to run. Now these heaters were heating the body mass of the animals, so you don't actually see the temperature benefits on the temperature sensors. But we'll come on to speak about how important and critical these were later on. So if we now look at the data that we collected from the environment, what were we seeing? So here we've got the different temperature zones ranging from extreme cold stress to moderate cold stress, slight cold stress, thermal neutral zone, slight heat stress, and moderate heat stress. And at the top, we've got our CEVEC building. You then in the middle got external temperatures, and then at the bottom, you've got the hutch system. So we're really looking for 2 things here, the variability and trying to be as much as we can towards that calf's thermal neutral zone. So this is February last year, and what we saw is compared to external and compared to the hutches, we were sitting in that slight cold stress rather than that moderate to extreme cold stress that we were seeing external. If we then move on to early spring, so this was March, we are still getting this variability, but we're getting a lot more time spent in that calf's thermal neutral zone compared to the external, where you get that variability, and even in that hutch, you're going from extreme cold stress to thermal neutral zone. And we see this even more coming into May. In May last year, we had a slight heat wave here in the UK. And as you can see, those calves in the hutches, in one day, they're going from cold stress all the way to moderate heat stress just in a day. So imagine that variability and trying to cope with that. Whereas what we were seeing in our building was a lot more stable environment. And then just to show it a more of a typical summer here in the UK, we're really focusing on keeping in that thermal neutral zone. Whereas again, those hutches, even in June, which is a warm month here in the UK, they're still getting cold stress all the way through to heat stress just in a day. Okay, looking at an efficient system. So again, as I said at the beginning, a massive part of this was making the system efficient for the farm, making it appealing for Ross's daughters to want to take over the farm. So how did we do that? We really looked at the pen layout, the kitchen, the storage, drive-in access, having automated feeders, feed bin, and also how we controlled the whole environment. So pen layout, the idea of how we laid this building out is, as I said, every group was treated as an individual, and what we wanted is one group could come in and out of that building and not disturb the rest of the building. So we had a central kitchen area, so this was for cleaning and also for storage. All the pens were all in, all out systems, and we also tried to have it so each group could be rested between pens. We had a rear walkway and a front walkway, so really great visibility. And also at the end, we had it slightly flat for extra storage. So your drive-in access through the front to clear out, roller screen comes up, doors open, you can clear out each individual pen without dragging muck through the building, without disturbing the rest of the building. And then, as I said, on the pens, you've got a slight concrete lip, so you can clean out, scoop it out, and get it out the building easily. So you're not actually touching the plastic paneling. We had home and allow automatic feeders. So again, we had feed curves applied for each animal based on their age. We had notifications if a calf wasn't taking its allocated feed. We also got daily weights when each calf was feeding. We had that cleaning cycle, and then we had a central feed station, which then went off to four different feeders, which we did later have another feed station as well. And then we also had a dry feed bin, an auger. So we were offering constantly from day one ad lib dry feed, and that was being automatically filled up throughout the building. And then finally, how we controlled all of this was all through our Galebreaker I series. So we were controlling the ventilation, so the side curtains, the lighting, the vent tube, the heater, and the pen heaters. And then we were also collecting a lot of environmental data. So temperature and humidity, CO2 and ammonia, lux levels, external temperature data, water usage, dry bin, weight and usage as well. So we were collecting and controlling a whole wealth of data. And looking at that efficient system, we did look at the labor inputs of that. And what we were finding is that we looked at it per calf. So how much time Ross was spending per calf. And in our building, we were finding between 1 minute 30 when it was just daily checks and all animals had been trained on the feeders, to 4 minutes 45 when either cleaning out or if the calf had not been trained on the feeder, compared to a hutch system where it was taking a lot longer for each individual calf. So anywhere between 7 minutes 30 to 30 minutes per calf. So we had a massive saving just in that labour savings per calf, which we'll come on to speak to later, but that doesn't mean we're taking away from time spent, but it means that time on farm can be allocated different and it's more efficient on farm. I'll now pass over to Caroline, who will talk through the calf trial and some of the results we found.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chloe. Can you hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to walk us through essentially what we did during the sort of data collection phase. So this was a 12-month period from the September to the September 24 to 25. So throughout the trial, we were focused on a few key things, and Chloe's already covered the environmental performance and the labour element, but what's critical when comparing different systems is to understand the impact on calf productivity, as well as calf health, individual animal treatments, but also we explored things like behaviour activity and carbon modelling. And then I'll hand over to Andrew later to cover the return on investment piece. If we flip to the next slide, please. Great, thanks. So essentially what we did here was we compared the sort of calf performance in both the external hutch system compared to this new CEVEC building. Calves were essentially monitored from entry to the pen, so roughly 2 weeks of age up to around 3 months of age at weaning, and we were focused on a few key areas. So of critical to us was to understand the impact on calf health. So to do this, we did two things. We used an ultrasound lung score at entry and exit, but we also monitored and recorded all of the veterinary treatments for the individual animals across both systems. We also took records on calf performance, so we've got weights at birth, weights of entry to the system and exit, so we can calculate growth rates per individual calf, and we also measured straw use as well as electricity use per calf. And I'll talk us through what the impact of this is on the carbon footprint of adopting a CEVEC building. If we go to the next slide, perfect. Just to show you what we have, we have a range of animal types in coming through this farm. What we wanted to ensure was that we had a representation across all of those different breed sex combinations across the different systems. So we did our best to control for that. We can't make it perfect on a commercial system, but you can see here we've got a nice representation across the different systems. So what we have in the main trial is we explored the hutches versus the calves and the CEVEC building. We made sure that the nutritional profile of these calves was the same. So every single cow received up to 7.2 litres of milk per day. At the end of the trial, we also had the opportunity to look at different feeding rates. So we then increased for a small proportion of calves. I caveat that at this stage, this is a small number, but we're exploring the data much more because we've got much more calves coming through the system now. But we essentially upped the milk rate to 10.5 litres per day, and we did the same comparison on calf performance. If we go to the next. Perfect. So I'll walk you through some of the results. So first of all, I'll focus on the lung scores. So what we have here on the left-hand side is our lung scores on entry to pen, and on the right-hand side is our lung scores at exit. The green bars represent our hutch calves and the blue bars represent our CEVEC calves. And we've got a scoring system that runs from 0 to 5. So essentially 0 is a normal lung. And then as we increase the scale up to 0.5, this is higher levels of lung damage. And what you can see, what's most important here is the distribution. So these graphs represent the proportion of calves, not the total number. And what you can see is there's a lot more scores at the lower end of the scale, but we're already seeing some significant levels of lung damage on entry to these reading systems. If we look at the right-hand side, we're seeing a slight shift in that distribution. So we're seeing calves that are now suffering a little bit higher levels of lung damage. So we're getting more in the 3s and the 4s and the 5s. But what's important to note that this is much more pronounced in our hutch calves. So we're seeing a much bigger shift in the calves that are reared in the hutch system compared to those that are reared in the CEVEC building. If we go to the next. Perfect. And I think if you hit next. Brilliant, thank you. If we start looking at the sort of number of treatments, and I think it's important to highlight this here. So there's a few significant difference between the hutch calves and CEVEC calves. Remember, these are those that have got the same nutritional profile across both systems, but we do see a slightly higher level of treatments in the CEVEC system compared to our hutches for both pneumonias and scours. And this is really driven by the fact that we're monitoring these calves more effectively. We've got a lot more individual animal data by combining the technologies that are embedded in that CEVEC system. And if you hit next, I'm sorry, this is a building slide. You hit next twice. And if we look at the sort of lung scores as well here, you can see a result of that is that our CEVEC calves have significantly lower lung scores at exit of the building and a slightly lower difference between entry and exit compared to our hutch calves. And if you look at the productivity outcomes, this is following through with improved growth rates. So our weight at the second scan is much greater in our CEVEC calves compared to our hutch calves, and we're seeing much higher levels of growth rate in that system, even though they're offered the same nutritional profile. If we go to the next. So just to summarize the sort of outcomes there, we have had more treatments in our CEVEC building, really driven by better visibility of the calf in that building. So we're proactively treating more and we're optimizing treatments for the individual animal. And essentially we're allowing, the group housing system is allowing us to more effectively manage disease outbreaks by individual pen. With the lung scores, our CEVEC calves had much better lung scores than the hutch calves. And we also looked at the impact of season, and that becomes more pronounced during winter, where our hutch calves are really suffering a bit more in comparison to our CEVEC calves and hutch calves that are reared in the summer. So the hutch calves in winter essentially have a higher degree of damaged lungs, and that comes through in the sort of poorer growth rates in those specific calves as well. And that ties into the sort of message that Chloe was saying earlier about that environmental management and the environmental control being much more stable within the CEVEC building. And if we look at that in terms of numbers for our sort of production metrics, these CEVEC calves are growing roughly about 150 grams per day in comparison to our hutch calves, but these are on the same nutritional plane. If we go to the next. Perfect, and I think this is a building slide again, so if you just hit next once, perfect. And at the end of this study, we did a comparison between the sort of these two nutritional planes. Within the CEVEC building, it gives us that opportunity to essentially feed these calves a little bit higher. So if we increase our feeding rate to 10.5 litres per day, we can see an improvement in a few things here. So we're seeing a much higher growth rate from scan to scan, and from entry to exit to the building. So this is quite positive. If you look at the lung scores at exit, we can also see that these calves in the CEVEC building had a slightly higher lung score, but this is not following through with that poorer performance. These calves are outperforming calves, and with that compared to that sort of lower nutritional profile. So essentially, in the main trial, we had to hold those calves back a little bit in the CEVEC building because we wanted to match the same nutritional intake as hutches. But we're very much focused on understanding the difference in system, and we didn't want to affect that by feeding those calves a higher rate at that stage. And as you can see here, if we feed these calves a little bit better, they cope a lot better and their performance is much better. If we go to the next slide. Perfect. We also had a look at in more detail at some of the factors that are affecting these calves in terms of their performance. And I want to pull out a few things from the slide here. So essentially a blue arrow is positive and a green arrow is negative. So things here that stand out to me here, I've already mentioned the milk feeding rate is important, but if you look at factors like lung score at end, that's having a significant impact on our growth rate. So these calves are performing poorer because they've got larger levels of lung damage. I've also already mentioned that the CEVEC building outperforms the hutch. If the calves have had a treatment for scour, for example, we're also seeing a poorer growth rate. Males are performing better than females, that's not unexpected. But one of the most important factors here that we found was that if those calves are suffering in the first 14 days of life from moderate cold stress, that's having a significant impact on their growth rate. So these calves are performing poorer throughout the pre-weaning period, and I expect also in later life. So one of the key benefits for me of the building is that we have the ability to keep these calves warmer at a younger age. We're creating a much more stable environment for these calves to optimize their performance, but also optimize their health. It gives us the opportunity to really tailor that nutritional intake for those animals, driving those improvements in productivity. We've got the ability to get more detail about the animal. We're essentially driving these animals in terms of data. We've got lots of data at our fingertips, so we can optimize treatments at the individual calf level. That results in calves that are healthier at the end of the pre-weaning period, but also in later life. If we go to the next slide. Perfect. So what I haven't really mentioned yet is that we also, if we go to the next slide, please, monitored behavior and activity. So we allocated every individual calf across both of the systems. So every calf in the hutches and every calf in the CEVEC building was allocated a well calf tag. So this is essentially a tag that is a disease detection system. So it's based on two factors. So it monitors a series of activity features, but also surface ear temperature. And it provides mobile notifications on alerts for disease, and it classifies those in different severity bands. We go to the next slide. And I'm sorry, this graph is a little complex, but essentially this represents the different types of activity that we get from that system. So at the top end of the graph, there's top two lines there. They represent the 90 percentile, and these are essentially an indication of the higher activity bands. So things like feeding, exploring, and socialization. And if you look at the bottom lines, these represent the sort of median activity, and that's more representative of our general lying behavior. And I guess what's most interesting for me here is that the calves in the CEVEC building are generally more active, so around roughly 25% at both of these levels. So the green and the blue line represent our CEVEC calves, and the red and the orange line represent our hutch calves. So our CEVEC calves have got more space, they've got the ability to be more socially interactive, and what's also important to note, if you look at both of those lines, there's a much more stable profile in our CEVEC calves. There's a much more variable profile in our hutch calves, and that's probably down to the fact that they're dealing with much more variations in environmental temperature. If we go to the next slide. Perfect. And as an add-on to this project, we hadn't set out to achieve this early on in the project, but actually this offered us a bit of an opportunity to also explore the carbon impacts on adopting a CEVEC building. If we go to the next slide. Perfect. So this work was led by a colleague, Louise McNichol, who's got expertise around carbon modelling. So essentially what she wanted to do was take some real farm data. So these are not the farms that we've been working on, but extracted from the AgriCalcs database. She selected farms of different sizes. These were all year-round systems, and then she used that to calculate baseline emissions from these farms and expressed that in different ways. So we've got total emissions as well as emissions intensity. So that's essentially emissions per kilo fat protein corrected milk, but also per kilo dead weight. And then she was aiming to get herd sizes of between 165 and 440. Obviously, we need slightly different sizes of CEVEC building to manage the calves in those systems. So if we go to the next slide, perfect. And what that allows us to do is explore different scenarios. So if we, for example, adopt a CEVEC building on a particular farm, we can make assumptions about, based on what we know about CEVEC and the outcomes that we've achieved adopting the building, what can be potentially achieved in improved performance, reduced calf mortalities, and then improved performance in later life, because from the literature we know if we optimize calf at the early stages of life, we can also have significant impacts later on in life as well. So she ran 3 different scenarios. The first was reasonably conservative in terms of its productivity improvements. The second was a reasonable jump from scenario 1, and then scenario 3 was a small jump from scenario 2. We also measured the electricity usage in the CEVEC building, so we calculated the electricity requirements for adopting the different sizes of building, and then we applied that consistently across all of those 3 scenarios. So if we go to the next slide. Perfect. So this is just a sort of generic slide that tells you about the selected farms. So we selected 4 different farms from the AgriCalc database. So this is real farm data. They range in herd sizes of between 174 to 546 cows. And then we've got a range of different metrics there. So obviously milk production increases as scale of farm increases. The sort of standout feature here is that the 8-pen building, there was only 1 farm available in the data set. So all of those calves were sold at 8 months as opposed to the later age in the other farms, but everything else was reasonably consistent. If we look at some of the sort of productivity and mortality metrics, we see some differences between those farms. So if we go to the next slide, perfect. So first of all, what Louise did is she calculated sort of total farm emissions. So we've got our baseline metrics there, and then she looked at the differences. And what you can see here is there's some variability in the response. So you see some negative, and so some reductions in emissions and some increases in emissions. And that's largely driven by the different scale of the enterprises, but also the different levels of mortality. So for example, in the 8-pen building, we had reasonably high levels of mortality. So if we optimize our productivity, reduce our calf mortality, we're getting a lot more calves on the ground, and that's driving some of those increases in emissions. But what's more important is what's on the next slide, which takes those emissions and scales those to the productivity outputs. So we've got milk on the left and meat on the right. Across the bottom, you've got the different size of buildings. So we've got 3-pen building up to the 8-pen building, and the different colors represent the improvements in carbon. So what you can see is as we optimize the productivity outcomes across scenario 1, 2, and 3, we see a continuous reduction in emissions, and I think that's really, really important. So we're at the milk end, we're seeing up to a 6% reduction, and similar on the meat side as well. So essentially, as we optimize the building, as we optimize our calf outcomes and productivity metrics, we're seeing significant improvements in carbon, which is what we'd expect. I guess what's important to note here is that between scenario 1 and scenario 2, we see our biggest jump. And that's because a lot of the inefficiencies have been dealt with between 1 and 2, and there's less scope between scenario 2 and scenario 3 to drive further improvements. But yeah, this is a really nice outcome from this as well. And I think I'm now handing over to Andrew.
Great, thanks, Caroline. So finally, the one key aspect, and probably one of the questions that you're asking, is does such a system pay for itself? Now, as Caroline alluded to, we always set out to achieve a modular building design, and I will go on to explain what that effectively looks like with a 3, 4, and a 6 and an 8-pen building. But the size of the building required for the farm is basically an option or a variable that's dependent on a few farm specific metrics. I mean, just not only the herd size, but also the age at weaning. So how many calves you are wanting to, or the length of time those calves are in the building, how long you might want to keep them in the individual calf boxes before entering the pen, as well as how long you want to leave your hens to rest between batches. The key factor, though, would be the stocking rate as well. So we believe Ross has been filling the pens for about 12 to 15 calves. That's what we were saying is probably an optimum stocking rate per pen. But if you put more into the pen, you can obviously achieve a smaller building. Now, in terms of the cost of build, we believe if we are going for roughly 15 calves per pen, like we see in this table, that's what we're getting. We are the full cost of the build is about £3,000 per calf head. But just to explain then, just what do these buildings look like? Just move on to slide there. This is the 3-pen system. So similar to what we had built at High Skeog, a central kitchen with a storage space at one end with 3 pens. If you then move into a 4-pen building, this is similar to what we did at Ross's, but we've actually just tweaked it to make the kitchen a bit smaller and actually put storage areas at both ends of the building. And then moving into the 6-pen, you can just see how this increases. The actual width of the building is not changing. We are just growing the building in length, and that means that it ventilates the same. So a 6-pen, and then into the 8-pen. So the 8-pen at 60 meters in length has 2 kitchen spaces in the middle where the feed station would sit, feeding each 4 pens each. And then we've got a storage area at both ends where the calf boxes could sit, but bedding can be stored and feed can be stored in the kitchen areas as well. So yeah, that's effectively how we created those modular building, and the cost of build, as I said, that price per calf head pretty much works out to be the same for any of those those modular buildings, any of those size of buildings. So then the cost, the running cost, we know that the hutch system doesn't have the cost of electricity and the other equipment that we put into the CEVEC building. So what we did is we did monitor exactly the electric usage, but we can actually scale that right back to what the power consumption is of each of the devices we put in the building and actually how much they're used at different seasons. So you can just see here exactly the contributions or what was contributing to the overall 22,000 kilowatt hours consumed by the building over the course of the year. The key, more than 50% of the power consumption was in those infrared pen heaters. Chloe mentioned that cost per day to run, but we also saw from Carol Ann the payback or the benefits of keeping those calves warmer in those first 30 days of life gives us that productivity of the growth benefits and the health benefits of that calf. So even though it's looking expensive, we believe that actually that was very effective in what was the cost to run it. But you can see all the other contributing factors there as well. The diesel heater, however, on the vent tube, sorry, just back a slide, Chloe, that is again a sizable amount. It does consume a lot of diesel to run that diesel heater, and even though we're not using it that often, pulsing it on and off in those cold spells at less than 5 degrees, it does cost a lot to run. Now, actually, we would start to question if that is effective using a diesel heater. It shows how it can be used, but actually, I think this kind of innovation could be more appropriate if there was spare heat on farm, if there was coming from a biodigester or maybe other power generation on farm that could be utilizing some heat, then that kind of system to preheat the air going through the vent tube could be of benefit. So that was the electric and diesel, and you can see next slide that how those costs can scale up with the different size of buildings. Caroline mentioned we monitored the straw usage in both systems at the 4-pen system, obviously, but scaling that up, what we really saw was actually there was very little difference in the straw use per calf in both systems, and therefore not giving much cost differential between the two systems. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so then that's the running costs. The final thing that we obviously couldn't measure this because it's going to take 3 years from the first calf that's gone through the CEVEC building to actually arrive in the herd. But this is just some conservative improvements that we believe if you've got a healthier calf, a stronger calf growing and being replaced into the herd, then we could assume that actually they should be not only last longer in the herd, but also give improved milk yields. So just taking the conservative improvement of 3% as on a 25% replacement rate, using the current average price per litre over the course of year 3 to year 6 from the point of implementation of this system, you can start to see how those profits or additional turnover to the dairy farm can increase for the different size of building. So finally, that gives us that return on investment calculation. And what it summarizes to is that we're seeing a payback period, and this is, I will say, when comparing to a hutch system, is we're seeing a payback period from that initial investment for the full building, including all the internals and fit outs, of 3 to 4 years. And it is what I've shown, actually, it's the labour savings which is offsetting those running costs for the building. Because of the payback period only being 3 to 4 years, the future production gains that I've alluded to actually don't have much effect on the payback period, but can influence the longer term profitability on farm going forward. So what we set out to achieve in the project was to show that this system could be a cost-effective option for farm. And actually that has arrived with Galebreaker really seeing that this system, this building, can be a commercial offering for other dairy farmers. And we are pleased to announce today that we are launching our new product now called Calf Hub, which previously known as CEVEC. And I'll just explain what that really looks like if for anyone that was interested, and how we would go about realizing a Calf Hub solution on another dairy farm. Next slide. Next, yeah. So the Calf Hub, as we've seen or explained today, has multiple benefits and is a modular building that can be scaled to any size of dairy farm, with the outcomes of improving animal welfare through what we've shown, but obviously giving sustainable returns to the farm, both in carbon but also in profit as well. Next slide. But what does that look like as we try to if we had an inquiry tomorrow at Galebreaker, how would we go about realizing the Calf Hub solution? And we see that in 4 phases really. There's very much a tender phase where just understanding the quick metrics of the farm, the size, we're able to give a rough cost of what that could look like. Moving into a more detailed design where we can actually start to consider how that would pan out. And then moving into a build phase where we could project manage that with subcontractors taking place. And then eventually and I think Ross can allude to this, is that when you're moving from a hutch system to a group house system, there's a lot of learning to take place, the learning of systems. But because we have gone through that learning curve within the CEVEC project, our animal welfare team with Chloe and others can really help and support a new farmer understand not only have the building on farm, but the system, and understand how to optimize that system for the benefit of their animal. So that detailed design, next slide, really does look at where it will be positioned on farm and location, calf numbers, age at weaning, stocking rates, arriving at which pen size or number of pens that building would look like. But finally, we were able to do multiple tweaks and changes depending on what the farmer is really wanting to include within that building. And then finally arriving at a full drawing pack that can assist with planning, contractors and the full build process. Next slide. And these are just some photos of what each of those phases look like. So this was the groundworks. Within the groundworks, we're putting, as Chloe mentioned, the full sloping floor in, the drainage channel you can see there. There's still a bit of concrete to go on the front, but there's still work positioned within groundworks which are holding the pen paneling, as well as the hold down bolts for our frame, which you can see in the next slide. The frame build is quite a lightweight truss structure, big Meccano kit, that comes together as on farm really simply, bolts into place. And once that subframe is built, we can apply the concrete panels, we can put personnel doors in there, But eventually, next slide, Galebreaker would then skin the building with the fabric panels made to measure, fully tensioned, lifted into place. Again, very quick and easy to install. Was it fully weatherproof? Then the Galebreaker, next slide, Galebreaker products can be installed on the outside, but also on the inside, we've got the panels going in, the kit out of the auto feeders, and eventually with the calves arriving in the building, it's ready for use. So that really wraps up our presentation today. I thank you for your patience in listening to everything that we've shown, but really what's arrived at the outset 3 years ago, we set out to with a bit of a thought that we could actually create a optimum building for calves and make it cost effective. I think what we have shown through the trial and what we've outlined today is that actually the calf hub is that solution that can bring benefits to many other farmers if they were interested. And finally, then, we're very welcome to take questions today of anything that we've shared, and I'll pass it back to Mike. All three of us that have spoken can take questions, but also Ross, the farmer at High Skeog, is online and can also answer any questions you may have. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, if anybody's got any questions or anything they'd like to ask, then please put because there's quite a few of us, I won't be able to see raised hands. So if you could please put your questions into the chat, and I will then endeavour to put them to the various panelists. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for the speakers today. This is a project I've really enjoyed watching, going through the various phases of getting ideas and then actually coming out with a product at the end is fantastic. My first question, actually, as there's nothing in the chat yet, is to you, Caroline. How important do you think cold stress is in the first 14 days of life compared to, say, the variability of temperature when they're a bit older?
Well, that's a really good question, Mike, actually. I mean, I think, we know that cold stress is really, really important, and that comes through very clearly in the data. So it's so important. We've been saying this for many years. It's really, really important to maximize the temperature for those calves during that early stage of life. But equally, variability is important as well. I mean, if you look at the Chloe's graph that shows the potential of the CEVEC building, I think a stable environment is almost as important throughout that whole pre-weaning period. It'd be hard to say one's more important than the other. I think to optimize the sort of outcomes for that particular calf, we really do need to focus on both.
Thank you very much. Sorry, this is another question for you, Caroline. Could the improved growth have an impact on age at first calving?
Yeah, so again, it'll be really nice to follow this data through now. So, we've got a really cool building on Ross's farm. We now have the ability to follow calves from the pre-weaning phase into their more productive life. And we've been saying for a long time in any system that if we can optimize conditions for that animal in its sort of early life phase, we're setting that animal up for success as a sort of productive animal. So yes, there's potential benefits in later life. But what would be really nice to do now is to follow that through and actually demonstrate that on Ross's farm.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Ross. On farm, what impressed you most with the new building, and is there anything that you would change? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. The thing that really appeals to us on farm is the labour savings and how much easier it is to feed calves. We're a family farm, and we kind of found these labour spikes requirements at certain times of the day. On the traditional system where we're feeding hutches, the calves had to be fed generally around milking times, so it required extra labour round about them two common times of the day. Whereas now with the CEVEC building with the automatic feeders, even before you go out to start work, you can check on your phone your main metrics between the building and the home and live feeders, any issues that require immediate attention. And then if you are short-staffed, you can get on with other jobs knowing that the calf feeders are working away, and go up and sort out any calves later on once you kind of got the cows milked, cows fed, bits and pieces like that. So that's a massive one. The other one, again, it's a labour side of things. You know, we've done a lot of work in this building to make it to take a lot of the heavy lifting out. So all the dry feeds augered in, the calves are pretty much fed themselves. You know, generally what the time you're taking is you're feeding the young calves that colostrum for the first 5 days and just checking calves have been in the feeder. So it allows you to take a lot of the heavy lifting out and spend more time inspecting calves and looking at calves. So they're the two main things that, yeah, we're really happy with.
Okay. The other thing is that anything you would change.
Oh, sorry. Anything would change? Yeah, through Chloe and Andrew would be able to tell you this in more detail. You know, when we designed this building, there was an element of future proofing put into the building. So we couldn't decide. There was a couple of options we couldn't decide between, and we went one way. So I think one of the ones is that walkway down the back, that we decided to have that smaller, more for kind of inspecting the calves, whereas I would move the pens forward and be able to put bales. We use round bales. You could put a bale in at the back of each pen, and it would just a little bit more labour saving. That, and round about the drainage, there's a little bit. I would have the drains coming out the shed a bit better, a bit more run, just to get any ammonia from the fluid out of the building a bit quicker. But we're starting to get into the kind of small issues.
Okay, thank you very much. This is one for Andrew. What's the predicted lifespan of the shed, and how is the building coping with storms and weathering, like roofing getting brittle, torn, and ratchet straps fixing, etc.?
Yeah, really good question. So firstly, we are very conscious that PVC coated fabric for the roof is obviously seeing that UV light, and so we have selected a very high grade fabric for the covering of that building, and therefore the manufacturers of that fabric, it's designed specific for roofing as a roofing product, and they outline or indicate that it should last over 20 years. If, however, it was to become damaged, I think Ross had mentioned this as well, that unlike more traditional roofing products where you would need to be up on that roof and relaying a sheet or anything if they were to become damaged or need to be replaced, with our system, it is just, you would pick a good day, obviously, but it is very quickly you can take an old sheet off and replace it. So it becomes very easy to repair going forward, but we wouldn't envisage that for a good number of years. In terms of the weather, I would love to say I was confident at the beginning, but arriving on site and seeing how exposed this site was, being literally, you could see the Irish Sea from anywhere you stood on the farm, we knew it was going to take a battering. But I think if anywhere in the country we could have put a building to test it for its longevity, we picked the right one. And we're really pleased to say that it's now seen two significant storms, one being Storm Ewan last year, where if there wasn't a power cut at the time, we would have had the data to say, but we were monitoring the wind speeds and we were seeing 90-mile-an-hour winds at the point the electricity went off. And I think from Ross said it maybe peaked at about 120-mile-an-hour winds, and there was no damage to the building. So it certainly been put through its paces, but we believe the design has withstood what it needs to.
That's great. Thank you very much. I don't think I'd like to sort of be around in 120-mile-an-hour winds. Okay. Are there any other questions? There's this quick question that Carol Ann's answered already. Dry feed intake wasn't measured per calf. What was the measuring done, Andrew? What was the actual measuring done for the dry intake?
Yeah, unfortunately, we were just monitoring the feed bin weight, so we could see how much feed was being consumed. But unfortunately, it's being automatically fed to 4 different pens at any one time. So we were unable to see exactly where that feed was going and at what age of calf. But we could just see the average use over the pens that were being utilised. So unfortunately, yeah, that was lacking. All we do know is it was being available from day one in the group, and I think Ross could allude to what he was seeing, but I think they were taking that in at all ages.
This is one for Carol Ann. Do you plan to compare the CEVEC to more standard calf housing, i.e. standard shed build with a similar layout in terms of pens and ventilation?
I would love to. it's a short answer. Give me lots of questions and I'll definitely assess it. But I guess, going forward, as Andrew starts to build some of these on other farms, we'll be able to do some of those comparisons.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would really add to that. I mean, we know that this was comparing to an existing hutch system where we saw significant labour benefit. But I think every farm is slightly different. And I think through Chloe's work with the animal welfare team, where we're regularly on farm looking at existing systems and working out how to cost effectively or advise them better on how to cost effectively improve that environment. It doesn't necessarily need to result in a new build. But a lot of the products and the concepts that we've explained today can be applied to other buildings, but you might not get the all benefit that we've shown that actually from a greenfield site, we can build an efficient system as one. So Calf Hub fits one solution, but there are other options available. But yeah, we're willing to help any farmer realise how they could best do that on farm.
Oh, sorry, somebody's putting a late question there for you, Andrew. Was the concrete and calf feeders included in the price that you were talking about?
Yes, that was an all-in price. So it's not everything that Galebreaker would be supplying. But yeah, we were looking at taking it from a greenfield to a fully working unit. So everything internals included, but it's all farmer specific and it's all about which feeders you might choose, etc. But Galebreaker would be walking that through with an interested client.
Okay, as there aren't any other questions, I'd just really like to thank all the speakers today and thank Ross for all his hard work and putting up with researchers tramping all over his farm. Thank you very much to Chloe and Andrew from Galebreaker, and thank you to Carol Ann from SRUC. Do check out both Galebreaker's website, SRUC website, and the DDC website for other projects. And if anybody's got any questions or queries, then do get in touch via the website or the emails for Chloe and Andrew are on the screen.